Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, where in today's video, we are going to walk and talk you through some top tutor tips to help you pass your Advanced Audit and Assurance examination. And I know just the gentleman who is going to help us out with that. So Ben, feel free to introduce yourself, my friend.
Hello everyone, my name is Ben Wilson. I'm the ACCA's expert tutor for the AAA paper. So if you've used any of the ACCA's free resources on their YouTube channel or whatever, then you've probably met me already.
Lovely, and you've got a fantastic voice. We've got to get on record as well, Ben, for that.
My daughter absolutely lays into it. Apparently I have a teaching voice and I try and sound gravelly and interesting. But when you're with a subject like audit, all right, an open secret, it is not the most exciting of topics. So if you've got to watch a lecture on it, the lecturer's got to make it interesting, and your voice is one of your tools you can use for that. So
I can sense the comments down below already for audit questions and your voice, but we've got to get straight into it. Students are there, pen and paper, wanting to take down some top tutor tips that if a student comes to you, they've got to do their AAA examination. How do you start them off to even get into with that fail rate, the pass rate of 34%? How are we going to tackle it?
And that is always, that hangs over this paper, right? 34% is the typical pass rate. Pretty much, it's always the lowest of the ACCA papers. And that is scary, right? You look at that and you go, these people who are sitting this exam, they're not ACCA novices. Most of them have already passed 10, 11, 12 ACCA exams. And then just over 1 in 3 of them passes. So 2 out of 3 of these ACCA exam experts doesn't pass the AAA exam. And so I think in terms of tips as to how do you pass it, you've got to understand why people fail it. If you understand why they fail and why so many of them fail, then you can avoid those pitfalls. Spot
on. Well, we might be hearing from students who have already failed this exam, who are watching this now. Yeah. If you had to do the exam and treat yourself, Ben, how would you approach it? What top tips that you see from your students, feedback in the external examiner reports, where are we going to kick ourselves off?
Sure. Well, the first thing to say about AAA is it is very different to lots of your previous exams. And so most of those previous exams have lots of numbers in them. And lots of those previous exams will have lots of knowledge-based requirements. So it'll ask you a question, and if you've memorized the right bit of the textbook, you write what you've memorized and you score the marks. Or you've learned how to do this calculation, and so the one in the exam will have different numbers, but it's still the same calculation, and so you do what you've practiced. AAA doesn't have very few marks for calculations and almost no marks for demonstrating knowledge. So the thing I say to students up front is, if you prepare for this exam in the same way as you prepare for the ones that gave you lots of marks for calculations and gave you lots of marks for knowledge, well, these are apples and pears. They're not the same things. So you have to prepare differently, because this is not a knowledge or calculation exam. And many students don't prepare differently. They say things like, my approach worked when I did the PM exam and the FM exam and the SBR exam. Why isn't it working for AAA? And the answer is, it's a completely different type of exam.
Yeah.
So I guess I've said there what it's not. What I probably should say is what it is. So where the marks are rewarded is for your application of knowledge. So they will ask you about a topic area, something like audit risk, and you won't get any marks for showing that you know what audit risk is, for writing definitions of it, or writing standard things out of a textbook. What they'll do is give you a really detailed scenario that has audit risks within it. So an audit risk, if anyone doesn't know what it is already, is there's a number that's wrong in the financial statements and the auditor has missed it. Right? So they'll give you a scenario that points at reasons why a number in the financial statements might be wrong and why the auditor might have missed it. And your skill and what you get the marks for is being able to spot that in a scenario. Yeah. And it might be spread over 2 or 3 places. They might give you 3 or 4 exhibits where they tell you some numbers about it here and some background information here and some more information here. And your job is to bring all of those things together. Yeah. And draw them together and to say, well, this number might be wrong because of this piece of information here. When I analyze it in the context of this piece of information as well, when I add them all together, we've got a problem. But that is application. Right? You need to know what an audit risk is, but you have to have skill, exam skill, to be able to draw the required information from the scenario and bring it together to tell a story.
Yeah, I can't agree any more on that. And speaking from my experience of failing it once and then passing, thankfully, the second time, application definitely was a key word that stuck in my head. And also detail, referring back to the scenario, such as using the company names, people who are involved in it, specific figures. All of these things help me to build more specific answers rather than the generic ones, which I had a read of the external examiner's report. And basically, they're right. If you write generically and you write definitions,
you won't pass.
Yeah.
You won't get marks. You won't get
Basically.
marks. Something that students often don't do, it's a really simple tip with that thing around using facts in the scenario. It's almost like, I was told this in the scenario. Right? I was told this in the file extract about this company. So I don't need to say it in my answer. Right? I won't get marks for saying it in my answer. And actually, your answer is very often like briefing notes to somebody who hasn't read all the background information that you've got. So whilst you're not going to get marks for copying and pasting lots of information, right? That's not what I'm saying. But you have to take things from it and say, this thing that I know about the company from the background stuff I've got in the exhibits, and then I add my own analysis on top of it.
Exactly.
That's what scores you marks. But you don't be afraid to, use the stuff that you're given, because the person who's your briefing notes are to, they won't have read those documents that you had access to, those exhibits.
Exactly, on there. And all the trials and tribulations of my old AAA revision are coming back to me now, where students are going to be asking me, I can feel it, time management, Ben.
Well, that was going to be my, so first reason people fail is because they have the wrong study approach, right? So they focus on knowledge, not application. And you brought us on to the second one, which is time, right? This exam is ridiculous, right? Get it out there. It is nuts, right? They give you 3 hours and 15 minutes to do tasks that ideally you'd want 5 to 6 hours to do properly. Right? And that's for someone who's like experienced in auditing, where English is their first language. And for a lot of the students sitting the AAA exam, they're not experienced auditors, and perhaps English isn't their first language. And they've got to do all of this reading, analysis, planning, writing in about half the time that they'd actually want to do it properly. Right? It's absurd that they make you do it in 3 hours and 15 minutes, but they do. Right? That is the challenge. So you have to go, you've got to like address that early on and go, one of the really difficult things about this exam is the brutal time pressure. And my biggest tip for that for students is I get a phenomenal number of students. So when I help a lot of people to resit this paper, right? So they try and do it on their own, or they work with another training provider, they don't pass, and then they go, I'm going to try and find someone who's going to take a different approach, right? So I work with lots of people who are resitting. And I always ask them, what was your experience like? What did you do last time? And, when did you start doing questions to time? And often the answer is, I didn't do questions to time at all, or maybe on my mock, right? Maybe right at the end, I did some questions to time. Certainly not. I wasn't ready to do them to time earlier on. Wasn't ready, so I didn't do it. And actually, part of the skill you need to develop is being able to manage your time effectively, and working within that time pressure when you're doing your practice questions early on in your preparation means that you start looking for shortcuts. You start looking for things like, oh, that's a really difficult point to explain, a really long point to explain. So I'm not going to bother because I haven't got time. What I will do is look for the ones that are going to be short and easy to explain. I can get enough of them to pass, and then I won't bother with that big difficult one. The person who's never practice questions under timed conditions when they've been training, they'll look at that big one and go, oh, well, I'll have a good go at that. And the clock goes out the window. In their preparation, it didn't matter. But in the real exam, they end up massively overrunning on that question, and then they don't get through. Yeah. So practicing questions to time early on will help you to develop those practical time management skills that you need to pass.
Completely agree on that. And I hear it from students all the time that, oh, James, I only answered 80 marks on the exam, 85. And they go, oh, my word, it's hard enough already. We've got to be doing at least 100.
Well, and that won't work in AAA. Right, so in some of the other exams, so I've taught many of the other ACCA exam papers over the years. Financial management, for example, and a lot of the watchers of this will have sat the FM exam.
Mhm.
There in that exam, there's generally an MPV calculation, right? And if you know what you're doing in an MPV, you can get full marks. Right,
Mhm.
or close to full marks. You get 18 out of 20 or whatever on it. And so you can smash one question, get loads of marks there, and then the one that you're not very good on, well, you don't need to do much on it because you've got almost full marks on one of these earlier questions, right? In AAA, if you absolutely nail a question, you might get 65% on it, on that individual question. Like the overall global prize winner for AAA generally scores in the 70s. You know, compare that to like tax or whatever, where the global
Yeah.
prize winner will get 100%. Right? Even the people who are amazing at this subject only get in the 70s on individual questions. Right? So you can't, it's not an exam where you can bag really high marks on one question, and then because you've run out of time for question 3 and not really done it, it doesn't matter because you can get enough marks on question 1 and question 2. Doesn't work like that, right? If you're a piece of butter and you've got 3 slices of toast, you've got to spread your butter over all 3 slices evenly to give yourself a reasonable chance. Right? You cannot have 2 nice buttery slices and a piece of dry toast because you won't pass if that's the case.
Very good analogy on that. That's very good. Like that for it. The other things that spring to my mind that would help a student to pass, I presume you talk about the ethics and professional skills module, doing SBR before they've done advanced audit assurance. Do you want to walk and talk us through those 2 areas?
And the second of those is business critical. Okay, so SBR, you must do SBR before you do AAA. Right? About 10, maybe 15 marks in the AAA exam are reliant on your knowledge of accounting standards. Okay, so they'll ask you, you know, I talked about audit risk as a typical area in the exam. A number is wrong in the financial statements. One of the reasons it might be wrong is because the company is incorrectly accounting for something. But for you to be able to spot that they're incorrectly accounting for something, you need to know what the correct accounting treatment is. And so all of the reporting standards that are in SBR are examinable within AAA. Right? It's not the SBR exam again. Like you're not going to have to write absolutely loads about them, but you need to know the accounting standards. So yeah, that is an absolute must. I've fed this back to ACCA. Well, I've asked the question and discussed it. Why do you let people sit AAA before SBR? Right? It's madness. Like they must have done the content in SBR to be able to do AAA. And the answer is that they want to allow flexibility. You know, they want, you know, some markets, you know, they don't, tuition providers might not offer all the papers all the time. They want flexibility, right? But ACCA say themselves, you cannot do the AAA exam if you haven't done SBR. So that's critical and a really good point to draw out. The ethics stuff, helpful, but not as critical. So ethics, 5 to 10 marks in this exam. If you have done the ethics module within ACCA before doing AAA, it sets a good grounding, right? It's helpful. But it's not as critical as having done SBR first.
Exactly. But every little helps that could just get you those little few marks on
You've got to do it at some point. So you might as well do it at a point in which it's actually helpful for the rest of your exams, rather than leave it till the end and, you know, you're just ticking a box then.
Exactly, on there, Ben. But I mean, what other final points have we got for top tips that are going to help a student get those extra few little marks that are going to get them the 50 plus, would you say?
Yeah. My advice would be focus on quality of question practice rather than quantity. So what I often find is I'll have a student who's resitting who says, I've worked through every question, every past exam question, I've done them all. And then when you actually discuss what they have done with those questions is they've looked at the question, had a little think about it, and then read the answer so that they know what they're supposed to have done. And then they've done that question. So that's their definition of having done the question.
Yeah.
And the point for me of question practice, and the thing that's helpful, is it's developing your problem solving skills. Okay, so you are better to do less questions, but actually fully do them. So I get the question, I do my answer plan, I do my written answer, I then have a break. I then have a look at the marking scheme, the examiner's comments and the answers. and I make notes and reflect on the question as to what I could have done differently, how I could have improved my approach and my answer.
Yeah.
And I would advise students to spend as long after reviewing as you did actually doing the question. So if you halve the number of questions that you do, but actually do them properly to develop your problem solving skills, you get way more value out of it.
Oh, absolutely spot on. Completely agree. I can remember all the hours of me going through, and you think to yourself, is it worth the time? Trust me on this. I always went into it saying, imagine you are the actual Advanced Audit Assurance marker. Would you give yourself a mark for what you've just written there? And you've got to be super, super, super harsh on you, because that's the standard that will be expected in the exam. And even just little things like I used to write pages, but then when you read the examiner's report, it's like, write your point, 2 to 3 sentences, 3 lines, leave a little gap, and then write your next one, so it flows. Even just little things like that just make such a difference.
Frustrating thing with that though, James, is when you look at the examiner's answers, the model answers that are published, they're like a textbook, right? And they are massive and huge paragraphs, and then when you read the examiner's report, he says, don't write like that. Even though I've set that as the example in the published answer, right? You can your answers in AAA should be brief, succinct, to the point. Right? You need to have a good amount of content in them, but you don't have to write like the examiner to get enough content to pass.
Absolutely spot on. Well, Ben, thank you so much for today. So many top tips. The students' hands writing them all down are going to be needing a little rest after this. But thank you so much for all of your insights today. I've put all of Ben's details, guys, in the description of the video. Feel free to connect with both of us on LinkedIn as well. Get in touch, how you get on with your exam. And I think, Ben, if they put these into practice, they'll be fine.
Good luck, everyone.
Lovely. Thank you very much, guys. And we'll see you in another video soon. Cheers.